Welcome, everyone. Delighted that you're able to join us today to spend some time together with Ali, with her art, and with good friends who know her art and have wonderful ways to help us further appreciate it. I tried the other day to calculate the number of decades that have passed since Ali first came in the gallery and eventually gave up. It's somewhere it's somewhere beyond 40 years that we've worked together. And it is a real tribute to her and to the energy of her creativity that the work feels today as fresh and as energetic, as personal as it did the first day she visited. I think she and I probably have aged a bit in that period of time, but the art itself has certainly sustained both of us. So, Ali, congratulations to you again on this exhibition, which will eventually be up this weekend. Ian's already hanging it, and one of the senses of the joy of seeing the work in the main gallery space is a kind of transformative moment, because they're generally on the side aisles of the gallery, and to have them spotlighted and highlighted in such a way really creates a whole different environment and opportunity to experience the work. So there are a number of wonderful people who are going to be joining us. And again, I think what we'll do is, as I call upon them, maybe they'll introduce themselves. But let's begin with the cover of the piece, of the catalog, with the title Other Worlds. One of the things that has been consistently apparent with Ali's work over the years is that, maybe not correctly said, she lives in another world. Certainly her work is there, and it is an expression of a universe that is both inviting, creative, and in so many ways unexpected. So it's with great pleasure that we're going to be looking at these works. This particular cycle of work features purses, and purses act as a reservoir of ideas and images that we're going to be talking about. And we decided with this show to include some of the jackets, again, as forms of containers. And Ali then, within those spaces, creates a magical world in fabric. And finally, there's going to be a small part of this that will deal with process. Generally, the panelists and even the artists don't spend a lot of time with process, but one of the most daunting aspects of presenting Ali's works is to enable you, the viewer, to realize that these are made up of bits of sewn fabric. And no matter how hard we try to either photograph them or show them on your screen, we've never been totally successful. So hopefully everyone will enjoy. And Caroline, let's look at the first slide if we can. This is one of the jacket series, bringing together a number of images. And Ali, I'm going to ask you first and foremost to talk about the jackets and also what you've included in those jackets.
Well, where do I start? They are jackets to start with. I cut the back out, flatten them out, take out the lining. I see it as people wear jackets and they sort of present themselves in a certain way, but then there's that hidden person under those jackets. It is a container. It hides emotions, it hides all kinds of things. And this is what's really going on. I did a long time ago, I did a piece with a sweater that was part of a fundraiser. And we all had sweaters that we were given. It helped abused women. It was a shelter. And the idea of taking this ordinary ordinary piece of clothing and transforming it into something else. And quite a few artists were involved with that. And it really worked out well. And it just sort of carried over down the road to this.
Talk a little bit about the filling, if you will, in your container of this child on a swing, the bar of the swing, obviously the hanger above it, and then the children's building blocks.
Well, it's kind of about maybe isolation. Here's this young child playing. The building blocks, a lot of young babies have them. I have images, I cut up an image of the Statue of Liberty on the blocks. So on certain sides, you can see parts of the statue. And it's just sort of a commentary. It's like it's piled up and built and it's all coming down. It is a social comment piece.
Rusty, welcome. Would love for you to respond to this piece and talk a little about Ali and your relationship to her art.
Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Yes.
Great. First of all, I've always loved Ali's work. I haven't found another artist who creates in the way she creates with the fabric. I would also add that, and I would add to what Bernie had said about seeing the work in person. The dynamic aspect of this work almost cannot be appreciated other than seeing it visually, and one of the amazing things about the work, and I don't know, Ali, if you really even need to do this, but as you change light on these pieces, they change as well. And this is a piece that if you light it centrally or light it less or light it more, conveys a different emotion almost in some situations. I love the little people in your work. There's so many little people like this little child in a swing that are they're small and central at the same time, and so the feeling of a large coat jacket, and there are many more of these there are others of these that have that same sort of sense with a little child inside. Made me feel it was a sense of what is the child inside us. The blocks, obviously, blocks get built up and they get knocked down. The social statement there is less strong for me because kids are always knocking the blocks. Every time I build them for my grandchildren, they knock them over. But again, just a wonderful, thoughtful. I mean, all of these works are engaging. They pull you in a way, but so thoughtful when you get into them and see whether one of my favorites was the letter that you put in a work many years ago, and the letter had such meaning. The writing, the thought that went with that, and the same is true here. There's a lot of space and then a focus on a particular thing, and then inside that thing, there's even something more for the person who digs in. And I think that's true visually, and I think it's true emotionally. So it's another wonderful piece.
Thank you very, very much, Anita, and also your background with Ali, which goes back way, way,
Oh
way
my
back.
goodness. I met Ali almost at the beginning, I would think. I remember her in the gallery downstairs, and you escorted me to one of her paintings, and I could not understand. I couldn't believe that was all done with fabric and stitches and cords, and it really does have to be lit. I remember my first painting was a very, very large circus scene, which hangs in my dining room. It was the first painting I ever had of hers, and it took me years to pay for it because I didn't have any money, but you were so nice and worked with me. But I just can't, I began collecting her work. It's so important in my life. That painting that you referred to, the letter,
Yeah.
I have that. It's in my dining room, and it's just it's very beautiful. I believe it's a letter that that Allie was writing after Jack died. Am I correct, Allie?
That series did come out after.
Yeah.
I
Anyway,
lost it.
okay. I didn't realize it was a series, but it's a very,
Well, they're all kind of connected. There's a few there that have that feeling, I
yeah,
think.
it's a beautiful work. I just love your work so much. And yes, I agree that it's always interesting to see the little figures in her paintings. Almost every one of mine, and I have one from every period now except purses. But I have no more wall space. Oh, well, I'll have to see if I can move something around. Anyway, the little people are fascinating. They're alone, they're small in this big world, this dream world. Uh, it's very, very poignant to me how alone they are. Anyway, I just love Ali's art. I think she's an absolute genius.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful way to, let me share this quote, and then Mara, if you can use it as a basis for your response to this piece. Brother Thomas wrote that there is a unity of creative experience that cuts through the differences of the medium. And now Mara.
Okay, well, I would think that Brother Thomas was really referring to what an aesthetic moment is. Because pottery, a cloth painting and drawing, a painting, a sculpture, a dance performance, poetry. The unity that cuts through it is the unity of one human being looking at the creative endeavor, an object of contemplation by another human being, and that's what we're all here for. So I think on that level, Brother Thomas is just talking about the aesthetic moment, which is, I think, the most wonderful thing you can do with your life personally, but it's okay. But there's another thing I'd like to point out about Allie's work, and this cuts across all of her work with being a cloth painting where these, everything is fabric. And I've done a lot of textile shows, from large abstract to jacquard printing, tapestries. I'm a textile person. And I notice in museums and in art galleries, when people encounter a quilt, or they encounter a tapestry or a painting, an artist who's just using fabric in these ebullient installation style pieces, they almost can't help themselves. They have to touch it. They know they're not supposed to, but they have to. They just have to. And I see people reaching out and touching. I at least say, could you just use the back of your hand, because there's no oil on the back of your hand the way there's oil on your fingers in this respect. And I'm guilty of it myself, believe me. I just know how to sneak it in better. And I've come to the conclusion, the reason people respond to anything that's fabric-based, that's textile-based, when you really think about it, apart from your mother's skin, the first thing that touches you is cloth. And then you are swaddled in cloth. And then we sleep on sheets. And every day we put some piece of cloth or another on our body multiple times. We towel off with cloth. That I think our most intimate fabric is cloth. I mean, our most intimate relationship outside of our relationships with people is with cloth. And it is remarkably powerful in the viewing experience.
That's a fascinating sort of insight into thinking about the work itself, and maybe to ask Allie what attracted her initially to create these works or cloth paintings 45, 50 years ago.
I'm not sure. I always like making things, sewing, the fact that you can pick it up and handle it. It's sort of developed. I thought maybe I would do book illustration when I first got out of school, and I wanted to put together some kind of portfolio. And it seemed like, well, maybe it has a different look if I use fabric instead of just paint or drawing, it will have a different appeal, different look. And then I got hooked on it. It really started off just trying to put together a portfolio that had a different look. And then I found how much I liked it. And yeah, I think that way now. I like to draw, but I think in terms of layering when I put the stuff, move it around, it's just a way to sketch. And then you can pin it up, look at it, think about it. It's very direct. The tactile surface, the way the light hits does make a difference. So certain fabrics like a velvet, it depends on which way you place the fabric. If it's upside down, it reflects very differently from if it's cut on a diagonal or turned around. I do pay attention to that part. I just like the way it feels in the end.
Well, if I would argue for sure as we go to the next piece that it, from my perspective, certainly feels good to look at and to enjoy. But more than that, the Renaissance paintings were essentially layers of color with varnishes between them. And in so many ways, you tend to use the nettings to create the layering. So essentially, the viewer is looking through the layers of paint, in this case, the layers of fabric, so that the color richness in many of the pieces is enhanced simply because you have layered the fabric one on the next. This is quite an extraordinary piece with a lot of movement in it. And I'm going to ask Mara if you would begin just from your perspective, how you see it, how you experience it, and then we'll go from there.
Well, this one is dramatic in its movement and relating to like a storm-tossed sea. And of course, you think of the Emma Lazarus poem, the crossing of the Atlantic for multiple generations of people to get to the Statue of Liberty, to get to the moment where they can breathe free. Coming with only the clothes on your back. And so, the tatteredness of this particular jacket. So I think all of that kind of what we would probably think of as more 19th century feeling of immigration, because that's when Ellis Island was open. That's when your first sailing was into the harbor, and the storm-tossed sea feeling here is what most immediately comes through for me.
Very interesting, because I think that although the Statue of Liberty is here and the things that you're referring to are obviously present in it, there's also such an energy that comes from the movement in the waves, so visually it is moving in the best sense of the word. Brother Thomas had this wonderful quote about art and its interior world is like the back of a tapestry, all knots, loose ends, incomprehensive. And yet, when it comes together in a piece like this, it all sort of makes moving sense. Rusty, your thoughts about this?
I really like this piece, and I look at it a little different than Mara does, not in terms of what I see, but how I interpret. And so I happen to know that that Allie survived a hurricane down in Florida. So these turbulent waters might reflect the element of water that entered into her home there at one time. But these are turbulent waters with a huge amount of movement, Bernie. I agree with you completely. And it's so exciting to see. And then the torn fabric matches that. There's movement in the fabric almost that sort of says, gosh, this jacket is torn. And the Statue of Liberty, to me, may be falling over, may be descending, but I get a very modern, I take, and this is probably because of where my emotions are today, I take a very modern look at this of the turbulence in our country and the Statue of Liberty representing the United States and the freedom that we thought we were offering to many of the immigrants that came to this country. And now in tossed waters and tattered clothes, that may be in great jeopardy. So this really resonates with me, and I suspect it has to do with what I'm feeling in today's world.
there is a thought of Thomas's always that artists are those who not only create for themselves, but also foresee events. And this piece is probably 3 or 4 years old. And your interpretation certainly makes it extremely contemporary, tragically. The next slide is a detail of the center of this piece. Ali, do you want to speak just a bit about this particular detail? And then, which we have never done in the past, was one of these presentations. I'm going to ask you to kind of carry us through what one would call process, because it is relevant to helping people better see the work and appreciate the layering of the fabric.
Okay, well, this particular white piece was, I used a lot of sheer fabric. Sheer with pattern on it. That was just, I don't even think I have it in here. Can't find it. I have too much stuff. Some of the color, I think there's some pastel on top, and then the white with the sheer fabric with the white lines and texture. I just cut that out. These are all little pieces of different fabric. And I left the buttons. It just showed, yeah, and I sewed it down. But to show you how I started this, I think there was a video, a short one that I'm sewing on another piece, which actually is behind me. You want to know physically how I put it together?
I can bring up, do you want to use this first or should we go to the, I can show the video too.
I think the one video where I'm stitching because I'm moving things, well, we could start here.
Oh.
It's the same technique. I mean, I start with a background. Just that's the size of the painting. And I cut a purse. This is not the jacket, but it would be a jacket. I started adding, I was thinking maybe I'd do a table. I start putting the things on there, pinning up. I don't cut for a while, like sort of get some sense of what I was doing. And with the jackets, I would pin up the jacket and then start playing with, I was thinking water and the Statue of Liberty not faring too well right now. It was political. So I just kept adding pieces and looking at it and moving things around and pinning. It's hard to describe. I don't have one from beginning to end right now, so I should do a time.
Should I go ahead and show the video, Ali?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, let's see. If the sound doesn't work, we can narrate.
Okay. I have a piece of black sheer fabric here that is not showing up. It's under the chain. I'll get that out of the way. I'm going to try a little piece that I just cut up to see if it adds anything, brightens it up, makes any kind of sense. I don't know. Not exactly right. It's a possibility. Maybe I would add that. We go under there. Yeah, maybe.
Lots of maybes.
Oh, it's all maybes. I never know in the end. And then I think, yeah, that's pretty good. And I look at it the next day and it's like, oh no, So I don't sew usually till I'm pretty sure of what I'm going to do. I try not to cut anything up into little useless pieces unless I'm sure I'm going to use them.
And you have back boxes or baskets filled with 40 years of collecting fabric, don't you?
Years and years and years. Yeah, I do now. It's sorted. It changes as I change the images. The categories change. Like I have plants with a white sky, water blue, green water, special bright colors. That's something. It's just a mixture. Plants, light colored, green shears, sheer patterned. I'm just looking around the ground cover, that sort of thing. And then the wall behind me is I use it as a bulletin board. It's insulation that I painted white, that foam pink foam, whatever it is. So I can move everything around,
Mhm.
pin it, take it down, put it up.
It's an extraordinary, I mean, it's very difficult even with this presentation to really understand that it is an ongoing process for you and that there's no moment where you say, well, this is perfect, I need to continue to work with it. Generally speaking, my sense is that when I say we have a deadline, then you finish it.
Deadlines are okay sometimes.
They do
But
work.
things change because you think one part's really okay, and then you do something else, and it's like it doesn't. It still might be okay here, but it's not okay here because everything interacts. So it keeps changing. It keeps moving.
It's one of the things that a painter does by just painting over areas. But in this case, you're actually moving the fabric, the shape, the form, and then beginning to sense how it fits together.
Right.
It's part of an ongoing process. It's not as if you begin at the beginning and say, well, this is a straight line, I'm going right to the end of the piece. Rather, it's more a kind of artistic dance.
There's no straight lines. It is like paint, except that I don't have to scrape it off or paint over it. I can just remove it or put another layer on top and see what I think. So that's another reason I like fabric so much, is that it's very loose. I mean, you can just keep playing around with different things and ideas and start
So
over.
let me ask you, and then others too, to chime in, that at the end of it, from the point of view of the viewer, somebody who's experiencing the work, there is a visual, emotional integrity to each of the paintings that you've created, whether they're jackets or purses, people swimming, circus images. Each of the completed images gives the feeling that you actually knew what you were doing. You know what I'm saying?
Good. Don't tell them I don't. I know by the end. I finally get to a point where, okay, let it go. But when I start, I don't have an idea. I may have an idea, but it normally does not end up the way I think it's going to.
Mara, how would you respond to that sort of process if that's what it is?
I was a theater designer at a young age, and it sounds just like the creative process for draping and embellishing a costume. What I'd like to say, though, is you do sort of settle on a central character pretty quickly, the purse or the jacket. It seems to me that there is a central character always in these pieces.
More and more. I think the early pieces with the circus, well, there were the early piece that Anita has this wonderful kind of circular, I don't know, stand, I think, in the center of it. And then everything else seems to have grown out of that in that particular piece. Let's look at the next piece as well. And to have Rusty, if you have a moment to think about it and talk about it. Pandora's Purse, and the essay in the catalog, incidentally, that was written by Catherine, is really excellent to both share with you the Pandora's myth, but at the same time apply it to Ali's imagination. So Rusty, I'm sorry.
Well, that's all right. It's another very, very powerful work of art. Pandora's box and the whole concept of the purses is a fabulous one. I I think it's underutilized because of the issues that we all face in life that come out of places that we didn't know they would come, and what was our contribution to them. But the combination here, once again, and all of your works have it, Ali, is that the movement, the flame that's there, the smoke that's there. I mean, this is reminiscent of Sandbach paintings with fire and smoke and movement and sort of consumption, because fire does consume. And then the little person is there. There's a little person off to the left. That little surreal feeling of the tree and things that you've created throughout. I mean, from the very beginning, there are these wonderful sort of surrealistic images of landscape, but really a very powerful one. I don't know how you go about naming your works, but Great Balls of Fire sounds like Jerry Lee Lewis to me, but there's a whole lot more to this painting than that. But I was going to ask you, and I want to reiterate what Mara said, is that there are themes that you work with, where purses or jackets or waterfalls or canyons and things. And I assume that probably is something that you have an interest, something grabs your interest. But do these works talk to each other? Because I would think that as you're creating, 5, 8, 10 works in a theme, that somehow that might be a process of interaction.
I do work in a series. One image usually leads to the next one somehow. It's like that part's pretty good. I like what happened here. What if? There is a progression. It's like maybe a conversation that I'm not totally aware of, but
Yeah.
there is a progression. I mean, right from the very beginning, one series would eventually lead into the next series. It would start to change, and then something would happen, and I'd be somewhere else. But it wasn't just, here's this and here's this. There's a timeline.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anita, your thoughts about this piece?
I really respond deeply to this and to the hurricane scene with the Statue of Liberty. And I do believe that they represent what we're going through right now, losing our liberties and having this horrible time that we're living through. And I'm interested. I did not realize that Statue of Liberty seascape, which is so violent, had been done 4 years ago. It is prescient. My gosh, it's all coming to pass. Everything is in turmoil. And Ali, you have a seeing eye.
It's quite wonderful. I just, Mara, your thoughts too.
Well, it's always interesting to me when people talk about Pandora and releasing evil on the world and releasing fire, and because fire is why Zeus was mad and gave Pandora fire, is the releasing of these evils. Everybody always thinks of Pandora's curiosity got the best of her and she opened this evil box. But when you release fire, there is destruction, certainly, but there's also purification or ritual purification. What's left when this great power is released, left in the jar, not the box, the jar, or the purse in this case, is hope. If you know the whole myth, it ends with hope. Pandora is a figure of hope.
Fascinating. I'm also looking at the juggler below the windows in the house that are included in part of the energy. The other thing that has continued in a very positive way with the work over the years is a sense of movement, that in the very beginning pieces, they were more static. The figures were there, the fabric was there, the lines were there, whether they were acrobats or high wire walkers, but they were like caught in a moment. Here, there's a sense of continuity and movement that really, Ali, adds so much visual energy to what you have created. Let's look at the next piece.
The other piece, Bernie, we don't have it here, the waterfalls. Those things have such movement. I mean, the way that you put the water together, and then you have someone hiding behind the waterfalls, but the movement of the waterfalls is really amazing.
And what we have decided to do at this show is the main gallery will have these pieces, and then the hallway will in fact have a couple of the waterfall pieces. So in a way, it's an opportunity for a retrospective on a limited budget, so to speak. Mara, I'd love for your thoughts about this, because it's filled with a purse that his contents are pouring out.
Yeah, and time, where did you go? Which I had my 69th birthday yesterday, so I'm starting my 70th circle around the sun here. And time, where did you go? I was just a kid beginning my career about 3 weeks ago, as far as I'm concerned. So I think all of us in a personal sense, as well as in a, global sense, time as a construct, time, the passage of time, time in memoriam, have a relationship with time that is a little bit topsy-turvy. It is a construct after all. But what I love about this piece mostly is just how subtle the color is in it. That it's a dark piece. It's mostly red. It has blue undertones. It swings in a very short analogous color range. And I find it just, even on screen on a laptop, to be incredibly rich, like sinkable into, in terms of just its color. And then when you move into that dark color, moving into all the little teeny articulations of space because of these subtle shifts of color. Like the juggler exists in one space, but the clock exists in two spaces behind him, and the bigger clock actually feels like it's casting a shadow, but it's all still really shallow, really minute fractions of spaces or fractions of time.
So Ali, I wanted to ask you how you respond to that viewing of your work.
I think it's fairly accurate. It's like, all of a sudden we're like 5 years old or just starting, and now it's time's running out. It's just going. What happened to it? It's really like somebody just dumped out all the works of a clock, and we're at the bottom of it. Definitely, that's pretty much what I was feeling.
It's fascinating because art at its very best does deal with the human condition, meaning that it has a beginning, middle, and end.
Bernie, before we go to the next
No,
work,
we're not going. You go ahead.
I think that the thing that I think is always very important for Ali's work. Ali, you have some special relationship with flowers, and your flowers tell things about your work. And these roses that are upside down, as the purse is dumped out, are not the roses of somebody handing you a wonderful Valentine's gift. They're the roses of time passing almost. And then we'll see the flowers come apart. But flowers play a special role, I think, in your works. Do you think of them that way, or do they just show up as you're developing?
I think of them somewhat that way. They're very fragile. They're very beautiful, and they have a very short lifespan. They're just sort of these delicate, beautiful things, but we don't have them for very long. And I like the color, but
I would also say that butterflies are those very delicate, beautiful things that we don't have very long. That
exactly.
general quality of a cut rose, even a rose on a vine, but a butterfly, that all relates to this fleeting, wonderful, precious moment of beauty, and then
Yeah.
I think with that, we can move on and be reminded that time passes. Caroline, I'm sorry, I didn't ask you before because I'd love your response to Jack's jacket. Jack was Ali's husband for a long time and a wonderful presence in her life and the life of so many people.
One thing, I've gotten the opportunity to tour people around the gallery, and I'd say like 9 times out of 10 people, you say they're cloth paintings, and they don't necessarily, I think it's because it's not something you expect. You see it and you're like, it's a painting, but every time I would tell someone, they're like, wait, what? You know, it kind of throws them for a loop and they get closer because a lot of the sheer fabric she used to create space and depth, I think people assume it is paint when, you know, 99.9% of it isn't. One thing I've been thinking about through all these is how delicate a lot of the pieces are. Now, this one, not so much with the metal, it's much stronger, you know, and then the gentleness I think is kind of found in that sky rise. But these are pretty gutsy pieces. I mean, Allie doesn't work in a media that she can, you know, kind of look up other people doing the same thing. You know, I mean, it's much closer to painting than maybe like quilting or tapestry traditionally. So I mean, it's just, it's exciting where she like puts the thread and like, oh, I'm going to put this red thread somewhere that's in the blue, and how exciting that becomes. They're just fun pieces to really explore, especially in person, for sure.
Absolutely wonderful. Allie, do you want to talk a bit about the background as well as the jacket itself?
Okay, well, the jacket came first, and it had a very metallic kind of quality to it. And Jack, who he worked with a lot of flashing, painted materials, cut and bent tin, and he did quite a few things that with layers of paint looked like, say, the side of an old ship with layers of paint and all the rivets. And when I saw the jacket, that's what I was thinking of, because it was already kind of metallic. So I did the background like more pieces of metal and rivets. It's hard to see this really come out, but that's really where it came from. It's the background I chose because of what I decided to do with the jacket, make it look more like metal, sort of nailed together a little bit.
And Mars, some of the elements of it, particularly the vignettes on the sleeve.
Yeah, well, what I think of in this one, going back to the piece that was the Statue of Liberty storm toss that can relate to, you know, Ellis Island and immigration in the past, or hurricanes and destruction in the present, or what we're living through in the moment. When I look at this one, it has some of those same elements to it, but because it's a jacket with a man's name attached to it, and because there's all this riveted material in it, and because of these vignettes, the sea, tar paper shacks after a hurricane, tacking up things to repair things. And so I look at this whole thing, and it's a like a giant like nexus of do these rivets relate to a ship? Do they relate to after a hurricane? Because I feel like right on the front panel of the jacket on the left side of the image that there's a hurricane-like image, that there's a coastal area, that there are those kind of palm trees that you see in the islands, in the hurricane area of the Caribbean, and the Florida kind of islands, like qualities, the Keys, etc., the vegetation of Florida. So, but there's also a person referenced in here, and were I not to know who that person was, or anybody who's not listening now who knows who Jack is, who comes to it, it's, it's Jack's jacket. And what has Jack got to do with Ellis Island, with storms, with Florida, with other kinds of islands, with shipbuilding, with tar paper shacks, with metal roofs? Like it just keeps asking questions of itself and of the viewer.
Well, let me just give you a small hint. Jack was Allie's husband, and he was also a professor of art at the museum school. And as Allie alluded at the very beginning, he did a number of pieces using pieces of metal that were riveted, hence the apparent rivets, but sewn down in this piece. All that said, it also opens up all the other possibilities and questions that you just asked. The next image, however, and it's one that I think is just extraordinary.
Bernie, before you go, I want to compliment Allie on a very small thing that I think is fabulous about this work, and that is the ability to see the sky behind these various pieces of tin, because they're not together and sealing it away. There's a wonderful, very subtle sense of openness that's created by leaving those little wonderful blue lines, if you will, between the little riveted pieces of metal. And this piece, when you shine light on it different way, we look at this and you see how well lit, the Statue of Liberty is and behind it. But when you shine light on this in different ways, this is going to look not different in the sense of interpretively, but it's just going to have a different feel to it as you light it differently. But I think that just little effect, that little effect of leaving the blue between the tiles is fabulous.
Sounds good to me. Let's move on now to really one of the more extraordinary pieces, the sense of energy, of movement, of mystery in a very specific and very special way. Referencing Icarus for sure, but at the same time, referencing whether it's a pillow fight, whether the feathers have somehow taken over the universe, and at the same time, the elegant presence of the jacket itself with the sky at the top of the inside of a jacket. There is such a mystery of space, Ali, in this piece that it's just amazing to me in so many ways. So I'm going to ask you, Anita, because I think you have a nice sense of Ali's works over so many years, to respond to this piece first.
Oh my gosh. When I saw this slide, I just said, oh my gosh, we have to talk about this one. I love it. I think it's very simple in a way. There aren't as many elements as in many of her paintings. I'm always interested in her horizon. As a photographer, I notice a lot of horizons in her work. And I think, well, the Icarus story of trying to get too close to the sun and plunging to your death, trying to do things that are just beyond what you can do. And again, I really, because of the situation today, I think of that in this painting. I really, really like it. The simplicity, that jacket is so elegant. I think of it as a white linen jacket, and the feathers, I just think it's amazing. A lot of energy, all the feathers plunging in different directions. And the sunset or whatever, it's just beautiful, that sky.
It really is a wrong word or right word, a collage of various feelings, movements, moments that are brought together.
And the sunset reflected in the water, I think, is amazing.
Wonderful, wonderful. Ali, do you want to speak briefly about it? And then I'm going to ask Mara to add.
This one, well, I was very aware of the Icarus story. Back to Jack again. He did several pieces based on Icarus. It was a kind of a theme for him. I found the jacket, and it had the blue at the bottom with the gradation in it. So I was thinking water for sure. And it just kind of went from there. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with it? I knew I was going to have water, and I love the color. And I started playing around. I actually went to the beach and picked up some feathers. I drew a few, and then I also think this piece has real feathers in it. They were just so amazing anyway. I just wanted that sense of lightness. But yeah, he did fall to his death, but I didn't want that part in there.
I see. It's a good.
I'm interested that I wondered about the feathers, if any of them were real. It's extraordinary, just beautiful, Ali.
Thank you.
So if I could ask a question, Ali, I'm sure this painting or this work was almost completely done when that little tiny person in the background got put in. What is it? What what is it that at that moment, or maybe I apologize, you may have planned it all along, but that little tiny person inside the jacket with their arm, like they're in the water, where does that come from?
I usually have some reference to the scale. I use those figures. I mean, it's sort of like everything's bigger than he is. It's just happening around him. But it's a way to show scale. That it's this immense space compared to the small person standing there.
Great, thank you.
And Mara,
Ally, what year was this piece done?
Oh boy, Bernie. Um, what, like, I want to guess 10 years ago?
I would have to check
don't
by
know.
the, I don't think it's that long.
No,
No, but it's okay. We're both old enough to forget.
I always add a few years to it. Seemed like yesterday, but I add a few years.
Well, first off, I'm going to talk about what I actually see here and then what my reference like just went to. And that's why I was curious about the year. Again, this is a piece in a completely different hue versus the dark piece with the alizarin crimsons and the close color range in that crimson family. This is the blue, violet, purple analogous color that, you know, so it's very tightly attenuated use of color. Obviously, an enormous amount of shears are used in building up this surface, you know, sheer fabrics, organza-like fabrics, because it is just sort of achingly beautiful, the way a sunset or a dawn on clouds or on the ocean can be just achingly beautiful. And I look at Icarus is the title. We've got our feathers. We've got, you know, the plunge of the coat into the water. And of course, this is one little person who might have been the person who fell to the sky in this just enormous sea, lost in this enormous sea. But, and you said that this coat is white and it had the ombre of blue in it to begin with. But that shape coat, if you've ever gone to the white jacket ceremony when medical students get their first white coat, not the long lab coat that you see, you know, there's an immediate reference to a doctor when I see a white coat. And the short white coat means a certain something. So I just wondered if this was done in 1920 was my.
The jacket may have been. Allie and I are not quite that old.
I don't think it's quite that old. And
I'm sorry,
didn't
I meant 2020, sorry.
Okay, 1920 was.
The pandemic. Like,
Oh,
what happened to healthcare workers that year?
oh, that
They
makes
were
sense.
Absolutely.
Icarus, they were sailing to the sun to save us, and many of them were emoliated and fell into the ground. So I was just wondering.
No, that actually didn't occur to me at the time, but it is a good analogy of what happened. It's before the Statue of Liberty ones. I know that. No, it works that way too. I hadn't considered that as being part of it.
One of the nicest aspects for me, Allie, is the sense of the upper part of the jacket, which is above the horizon line, feels as if it is really emerging from the water underneath. There's a kind of subtle sense of movement that goes along with everything else that's happening within the space. It really is one of the more extraordinary pieces. I think when people do come and see the work and spend some time with it, they too will be very, very excited with it. Let's move to the next work if we can. All right. Allie, you're on. This is, I think, the last of the Statues of Liberty in this group of works that we're looking at, but certainly would love, because the contrast here in the highlighting of the statue is very different than in the other two.
Well, this all was, you know, it was definitely politics that set me off, like immigrants caged and not allowed to cross the border and just everything that's going on. So the brick wall is just a symbol for what's happening. It was more the way I felt about it at the time, but I mean, I still do. But
But it's
anyway, they're all sort of in response to what's been going on. And
does
this
make
little
it
one behind me is also, I think, got a brick wall in it at the moment. So
feeling the sense of being enclosed or entrapped, as many people have been already, and probably more will be. In any event, Rusty, a little thought on this one?
I will pick up where Mara left off a little bit. This is a wonderful combination of Mara's wonderful explanations of color. Here's the deep red, the wall. I think of two walls. One is the wall in the south of our country that Trump has always threatened to build and has had parts of it built. I also, amazing, it just hit me, is this the wall in Israel between the Palestinians and the Israelis that they've built along the highways. It's a very imposing kind of thing, but but the red is there, and then the wonderful mixture of dark skies, but still a wonderful mixture of colors layered with lighter and darker, ominous looking, of course, and a black jacket. Representing whatever black does. It can be death, it can be any number of things, but the combination here is a dark sky, a black jacket, an imposing red wall, and there in the middle of all of it is the Statue of Liberty, which makes you have to question what that statue represents when it's composed in the middle of what is otherwise a very dark sort of picture. So I think it's a very accurate reflection, Ally, of how you were feeling, and I feel much the same way in viewing it.
Sounds good.
I'm going
Has
to the
been-
center of the jacket here. I agree with everything you've said, Ally said. But what strikes me about this is the whitest part, the high lit portion is right in the center of the jacket, that the beating heart of this place of confinement, this place of stormy skies and red and imprisonment and shutting down, the beating heart where it opens up is the representation of freedom.
There's the luminosity that it has. You're absolutely right. And it's rare to see such a high contrast in one of the pieces. The night tent, which is an old silkscreen, which was originally a fabric piece, doesn't have as great a contrast as this particular piece does, Mara. Next one, please. This is quite an extraordinary piece in the notion of the combination of juggling and time, and calling it the juggling time, which I think many of us do, but in a very different garb for sure. So I'm going to ask you, Ally, just to begin talking a bit about it, and particularly the jacket itself with all of the concentric moving circles.
well, it comes back to I would go to the thrift shop and just go, really Goodwill or whatever. They have racks of old jackets. And this one hit me because it did have these embroidered circles on it. And I thought I can do something with that. And eventually that became I started to think of them as circles of time, watches, springs that are in the workings
Spring.
of a clock. It's back to dealing with time, and it's such a, I don't know, we're all so affected by it. It's so elusive. It's just everywhere, and I took apart some of the watches, and I have some hands in there. They're just sort of falling around. But the jackets, I started with the jacket and went from the design on that fabric, and this is where it went.
It's wonderful to be inspired by the work itself as you are working on it. Rusty?
I always like that whole concept of the art in some way having its own voice. You begin something and then it sort of leads you in a certain direction because you're open to doing that. I mean, you have to have an ability to do it. I love the color of this piece. I love the whole idea of time, sort of just not disconnected, but maybe taken apart. And I thought springs too. I thought the springs of watches and clocks that you wind up, when I saw this and looking at the title. I love the juggler. The juggler shows up, has been showing up for a very long time in Allie's work, and this whole sense of keeping the balls in the air, so to speak, of some balance as time goes by. But a beautiful piece, intriguing. Again, a darker coloration, but deep blues, but the contrast, and again, as Mar has pointed out, right in the middle of these jackets, as you look at them, whether it's hope or whether it's some sense of what might be possibility, there again is a wonderful silver, almost a metronome type of thing where a clock would go back and forth, and the big clock that is still intact is there, saying, no matter what falls apart, no matter what else goes on, there is a clock and it is time and it will go on. But it's placed in a wonderful position. So again, a wonderful combination of the techniques that you use.
And finally, Caroline, your thoughts?
Well, I just love that. I mean, artwork in itself should take you to another space, but Allie's work is almost saturated in that concept. It really is about taking you into another space. The shadows they're a little bit, ephemeral. They're not right where they should be. And that kind of makes you kind of question and play with your eyes. But then she always has that central character, like Mara mentioned, and the purse or the jacket, something's coming out or being revealed. Even in the earlier series of the circus scapes, you're inside the tent and you're kind of aware of that because of how empty and closed in the space kind of feels, even though they're very large pieces. But yeah, I love that they take me to a different spot. And even though they say a lot to me when I'm in front of her work, and it might be in part they're pretty big, is there's this quietness to them at the same time, but I'm still thinking about it a lot, but not in words. It's really dreamscapey. It really kind of takes you to that kind of thought process and kind of opens you up, and I mean they're enjoyable works.
It sounds like we did a good job by calling the show Otherworld to go along with your comments. Yeah. Let's look at the last couple of pieces, ending on the purses, which are the more recent of the work. But I think it's important for everyone to realize that Allie has managed over all these years to stay in touch with an inner spirit that then she articulates on the surface with the fabric, with the change of distance and space and color and texture. But the inner search, I think, in all these pieces for questions having to do with the meaning of life, the passage of time, what we as human beings engage all of the time is so critical to appreciate in these pieces. So I'm going to ask you, Rusty, to talk about this, and then Mara, and then we'll move on to the last piece.
This is Profusion, I think, that we're looking at, which is a nighttime piece, maybe because of the way the dark blue sky with silver lights in the background. The texture of this is really fabulous. There's the butterflies, or at least one. It actually could be a very special moth if we knew what exactly the genus was. But and there's a little blue butterfly. So again, the location, the space, what Caroline was just talking about. You're in a different world here, almost as though you're lying down looking up in some way, but it doesn't, none of it fits exactly. So it keeps you a little off balance, but the beauty of the textures and the things that you've overlaid in this piece is really remarkable. And the light, you've created a light within the purse that is breaking forth. And you could say, oh gosh, that light almost is going up and making little stars in the sky above. Anyway, I don't want to rattle on, but it's just what I'm giving you is mostly my impression of the feeling, because this painting, this work is so much of a work of feeling, emotions to me, and poignantly so.
I would just add the butterfly brought back to me a memory when Ali created a piece of a butterfly above a landscape as a memorial to Sue's sister who passed. So that what seem to be simple objects also have their meaning enhanced by the maker, and in this case, Ali. So I think we're going to look at the last piece with Mara guiding us.
This gorgeous piece, gorgeous.
Yeah, here we have the rose again. We have the tight color registration, all things that just appeal to me on a technical level. I love color theory. I love how closely aligned colors make you feel one way and contrasting colors make you feel another way. But in all of these last pieces, it started for me with the jacket with the spirals, and the feeling of sort of micro macro, or the personal and the universal, time as passage of time for us, which happens on a 24-hour clock, 365 days a year, year to year, which is sort of very finite. And then the passage of the universe is measured in millennia. It's almost infinite as far as we know. And she really captures that both in iconography, that there might be a spiral nebula embedded in all of those little other kinds of knotless shells, which could be springs of clocks. So this shifting in all of these pieces between something so much larger than we are. Time is something large. Time is something like out there that's constant and it's ongoing, and it's the idea of infinity and the stuff that's finite in our life. And here we have some sort of paper trail of somebody's life. We have things that look like crumpled paper, but they also could it be a clock? Could it be musical notes? Could it just be a letter from someone? But then there are these mysterious pools of light. So the purse is light struck as if there's an external source, but somehow beyond the roses on the upper left corner, you have a light that is otherworldly. And you have things that seem so very present and things that seem desolate in the same space. So this ability to shift us constantly through the emotions of the universal and the familiar or the specific, between the cosmic space and the known space, and then this imaginary space, because ultimately you're in Ali's imaginary space, pictorial space, which is not real space. And it's a wonderful, mysterious playground, both for intellectual exploration, visceral exploration, and enjoyment and reflection on those things.
Wonderfully said. Anita?
Well, I think of it also as the things that somebody leaves behind, their letters, their journals, and what do you do with them at the end of time?
Or your mother's evening purse or your grandmother's evening purse, because I have a whole collection of these things.
Well, I just think it's interesting that thinking about the things that people leave behind, the trail they create of their life.
Well, in a rose, for me, that's a trail of love, not just the letter or the purse. A rose represents something just so essential about the trail of love.
Yep.
Like the intangible things, kind of the
There's
spirit.
that lonely, there's the lonely figure again.
So let me conclude, if I can, first by thanking all of you very much. Second, a quote from Brother Thomas: risking and dreaming are primary acts of creativity. And certainly with Ali in these over 40 years, enjoying her taking the risks, at the same time creating dreams, which I, as I'm listening to you, all of you, I'm thinking of as visual poems. And each one of us brings to each of the poetry that each poem that she has created, our own baggage, our own sense of our fragility in the midst of a world that is certainly moving at a rather rapid pace in a way that some of us are less comfortable with. But that's what art should be about. And so the opportunity to have this conversation, not only about other worlds, which is what we've called the show, but about our world. So Ali, we're enormously grateful to you, and I'm grateful to all of you as well who participated. Thank you very much.
Thank you.